An HOA president demanded a newborn's birth certificate, or threatened fines for unauthorized occupancy. Deborah Krantz, who ruled the neighborhood with cold precision, didn't even live there legally. But Emily, a quiet new mother with time and evidence on her side, uncovered a truth that flipped the entire board upside down. And just wait until you see how one infant's name unraveled years of unchecked power. It was a quiet Tuesday morning, the kind where sunlight filters through drawn curtains, and the world outside feels far away. Inside the Harlan home, the atmosphere was hushed but warm, blanketed in the soft rhythm of a newborn's breath. Emily, still recovering from labor, sat curled in the corner of the couch, cradling baby Harper against her chest. Across the room, Jake prepared 2 mugs of coffee with one hand, balancing a sleep schedule and a life that had just changed forever. They weren't expecting anyone. The doorbell broke the calm like a dropped plate. 2 short, sharp rings that cut through the silence with unsettling precision. Jake and Emily exchanged glances. Jake gently placed his coffee on the counter and walked toward the front door, still barefoot, Harper now in his arms. The second he opened it, a familiar voice met him before he even had a chance to greet it. "Good morning. I need to see proof of residency for the new occupant," said Deborah Krantz, president of the Maple Glen HOA. She stood there in pressed slacks and a pale blue cardigan, holding a clipboard like it was a badge of authority. Her gaze wasn't on Jake. It was locked on the tiny bundle swaddled against his chest. Our baby?" Jake asked, voice caught somewhere between disbelief and confusion. Deborah's tone didn't waver. "Every resident of Maple Glen must be accounted for. That includes newborns. You'll need to provide a copy of her birth certificate, an immunization record, and an occupancy approval form by Friday, or we'll need to issue a formal violation and fine." Emily stepped into the doorway behind her husband, her face still pale and drawn from sleepless nights and healing. She wore a bathrobe, hair unbrushed, one hand instinctively gripping the edge of the door. "You're not serious," she said quietly. Deborah gave a small, tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I'm always serious. Rules are rules, Mrs. Harlan. If you're harboring an unauthorized occupant, the HOA has every right to initiate compliance proceedings. We're not trying to be difficult. We're trying to maintain order." Emily stared, stunned. Her brain, fogged with postpartum exhaustion, tried to catch up. Compliance proceedings? For a 6-day-old baby? She barely registered Jake closing the door. Inside, they stood frozen for a moment. The soft coos of Harper were the only sound in the house now. "I think she just tried to find our daughter," Jake finally said. Emily didn't answer. She was already turning back toward the nursery, clutching Harper a little closer. What began as a surreal demand quickly spiraled into something far uglier. Over the next few days, Deborah Krantz seemed to make the Harlans her personal project. It started with a notice, slapped crookedly onto their front door with blue painter's tape. Violation. Unregistered occupant. $75 pending fine. No signature, just an HOA stamp. The next day, another notice. Then a third. One-sided excessive noise during quiet hours, a reference unmistakably to Harper's midnight crying. The irony wasn't lost on Emily. The same sounds that once lulled her to sleep in the hospital now carried the weight of bureaucratic punishment. And then came the mailbox incident. Jake arrived home from the grocery store and found their community mailbox compartment sealed shut with a red tag. When he called the HOA, a bored-sounding assistant informed him it had been flagged for address inconsistencies. She wouldn't elaborate. But Deborah's SUV had been parked near the mailboxes that morning. Jake tried to confront her, tried to be calm. "She's 6 days old, Deborah," he said, holding Harper's blanket in one hand and the latest violation notice in the other. "Not a tenant, not a squatter, a newborn." Deborah didn't blink. "She is unauthorized. Until documentation is filed, she has no legal standing in this community. You chose to live under HOA governance. That means following procedure." There was no anger in her voice, just a clipped finality, the kind that made it clear this wasn't personal. It was worse. It was systemic. Jake stood there, stunned, while she turned and walked away. The neighbors noticed, of course. A few peeked through blinds, a couple whispered by mailboxes. But no one stepped forward. No one ever did. Deborah had ruled Maple Glen for nearly a decade, rigidly, methodically. She'd memorized the bylaws, interpreted them at will, and enforced them with icy precision. To most, she was untouchable. But Emily had reached her limit. She wasn't loud, she wasn't confrontational, but she was methodical. She'd spent years transcribing complex case notes for hospitals, line by line, word by word, until the truth made itself known. And now she was home, on maternity leave, awake at all hours, watching. Deborah had picked the wrong mother, at the wrong moment, in the wrong neighborhood. Emily didn't raise her voice. She raised her focus. Emily didn't yell. She didn't threaten. She simply opened her laptop. While Harper slept curled against her chest and the house hummed with white noise, Emily got to work. In the still hours between feedings, she scrolled through zoning maps, tax assessments, HOA charters, and property registries. She wasn't guessing. She was hunting. And it all began with a simple feeling. Something about Deborah's address hadn't sat right. The signature on the HOA notices listed 1207 Red Pine Drive, but Emily had never once seen Deborah walk into that home. She always arrived, always left, never stayed. It was enough. By Friday, Emily stood at the city clerk's office counter, a neat stack of printed screenshots in her folder, and a calm expression on her face. "Hi," she began, handing over a note. "Can you confirm who owns 1207 Red Pine Drive?" The clerk tapped at her keyboard, paused, and tilted her head. "That one's owned by Horizon Realty. Been a rental for years. We've got a tenant listed, but it's not Deborah Krantz." Emily leaned in slightly. "Is she on the lease at all?" The clerk shook her head. "Nope. In fact," she clicked a few more times, her tone shifting. "She's not registered to vote in Maple Glen. Her actual address is over in Oakwood Heights. Whole different township." Emily exhaled slowly. "So she doesn't live here?" "Not legally," the clerk said with a knowing smile. "Certainly not enough to serve on any HOA board." It took a moment for it to settle in. The woman who'd threatened to fine her family, locked their mailbox, and called a newborn a violation didn't even live in the neighborhood she ruled. Emily didn't rage. She didn't vent. She compiled. That night, she filed 3 formal complaints, one with the City Planning Commission, one with the HOA Oversight Division, and one, just to be thorough, with the state's Department of Consumer Protection. Each came with a timestamp, a stack of evidence, and her full name signed at the bottom. And just before shutting her laptop, Emily submitted a short message to the local news station's tip line. The subject line read, "HOA president illegally harassing new parents while living in another town." She didn't expect a response right away. That wasn't the point. She just wanted the first domino to fall. 2 weeks later, the knock on the Harlan door sounded different. It was firm, measured, absent the entitlement that once arrived with it. When Jake opened the door, he didn't find Deborah Krantz standing alone with her clipboard and her cold, rehearsed lines. She wasn't alone this time. Standing just behind her was a city compliance officer, dressed plainly but holding a leather-bound folder and a state-issued badge clipped to his jacket. His expression was calm, professional but firm. Deborah's was not. "Mrs. Krantz," the officer said evenly, "we're going to need to see proof of your legal residence in Maple Glen, your current HOA board appointment documents, and the lease agreement for 1207 Red Pine Drive." Deborah's mouth opened, then closed. She glanced quickly at Jake, then passed him toward Emily, who stood just inside, holding Harper with one arm and a phone in the other. "I've been acting on behalf of the board," Deborah said quickly. "I was a delegated authority. I've managed compliance for years." "But not from a Maple Glen address," the officer replied, unmoved, "and not with valid board documentation according to the county clerk's office." Emily said nothing. She didn't need to. The weeks of evidence she'd submitted had done all the speaking for her. The records told a clear story. Deborah hadn't lived in Maple Glen in over 6 years. The address she claimed was legally rented by an unrelated tenant through Horizon Realty. She hadn't voted in any community elections, hadn't filed proper board renewals, and hadn't disclosed her relocation as required by the HOA's own charter. Every warning notice, every fine she issued, it had all been under false pretenses. Her power wasn't based on rules. It was based on fear. And fear, Emily realized, only works until someone refuses to be quiet. By the next morning, the HOA posted a formal notice on the community bulletin. Deborah Krantz had been removed from her position effective immediately. Her prior actions were declared procedurally invalid. The HOA board, riddled with procedural gaps and expired appointments, was officially dissolved and placed under city review pending re-election. And just after that, the neighborhood mailboxes were unsealed. Emily received a short, templated apology letter. It wasn't emotional, but it was enough. It included a line about regret for undue stress during a vulnerable time and a commitment to revisiting enforcement protocols moving forward. Jake read it aloud at the kitchen table and chuckled. Translation, "We messed with the wrong mom." Emily smiled, looking down at Harper, now peacefully asleep in her bassinet by the window. Above her, freshly hung and double-matted in a simple white frame, was Harper's birth certificate, not taped to a door in defense, not submitted as proof of permission to exist, but proudly displayed. A quiet reminder that the smallest resident of Maple Glen had brought down its loudest tyrant, and that in the end rule books mean nothing when they stand on the wrong side of justice.